USS Constellation. There's a grand lady in Baltimore who has taken her rightful place as the Inner Harbor's crown jewel in the heart of the Chesapeake Bay. Launched in 1854 as the last all-sail ship designed and built for the United States Navy, Constellation's century of service embraced the ages of sail, steam, gas, diesel, and nuclear power. Imagine that, launched in 1854 and still afloat. Even more exciting, visitors can come aboard Constellation and explore to their heart's content. On board Constellation, history comes alive as visitors touch, feel, and experience what life was like for sailors during the Civil War. Just bring your imagination.
Hi, thank you. It's good to be with you today. I've never been on a ship before, so it's exciting today. Thank you.
Hi, very nice to meet you.
It's been Ben Curtis.
Hi, how are you? Very good, thanks. Come aboard and take a look around?
Yeah.
All right, well, let's do it. Let's see, why don't we take a walk back to the stern first while we're here. Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
I just like to bring everybody back this way first because this is sort of where you can really see the whole sweep of the deck, and it's kind of a nice place to sort of start a little bit about the ship's history. She was built in 1854. She's the second of 3 ships to be called Constellation. The first one was built here in Baltimore in 1797, right down in the Canton area, and there are 8 pieces of the original ship in this ship. We don't know where they are.
Wow. Okay.
But according to a newspaper report on the day of this ship's launch, they're in there. So that's good enough. You know, it basically
we don't
continues.
do shipbuilding anymore.
We do ship repair.
Repair, yeah.
Yep. But not a lot of shipbuilding per se. We're certainly equipped out at Sparrows Point if we ever had to. But the infrastructure is actually still there. When this ship was launched, it was basically she was launched in 1854. She was basically that she is the last all-sail ship built for the U.S. Navy. She carried a crew of about 325, which consisted of the captain, basically 10 officers, 5 line, 5 staff, a number of lower-ranked officers, a company of Marines on board, probably about 40 Marines who were basically the police force on board. All the rest sailors, 20 or so of which would have been ship's boys. So they were ages basically 13 to 17, youngsters on board, and for whom the ship was their home, their school, and their place of work. And we sort of, I like to think that we sort of can continue that the ship was never in any battles or anything like that, but she's always been sort of a platform for training and education. And
how long was she in commission?
She was in commission for 100 years. So a pretty long time,
Yeah.
Basically 1855 to 1955, when she was finally decommissioned and brought here to Baltimore in a floating dry dock. But just like when she was an active ship, she was either trained, either she had the ship's boys, who were known as powder monkeys on board, because one of their main jobs if the ship was in action was to bring the powder charge to their respective gun crew. So they were each ship's boy was assigned to one of the ship's guns. Later on in her career, she became a training ship at the Naval Academy. So she was there from 1879 to 1893. She was at the Naval Academy. Then she was in Newport, Rhode Island, where she was a stationary training ship. So always training, always educating. And now, of course, we have visitors on board. They learn about her history. And then we also do a ton of education programming on board for school groups and scout groups. Just about every weekend. Not necessarily right now when it's this cold, but we do get some winter campers on board. But we have a group of anywhere from 20 to 60 kids on board overnight. It's really fun. We do that here on Constellation and on the submarine. As I said, the ship carried about 325 crew, when she was first launched, she went to the Mediterranean. She's basically showing the flag. She was basically there to visit your Mediterranean ports and show American strength and prowess, and entertain dignitaries, and then just prior to the Civil War, from 1859 to 1861, the ship was stationed off the coast of Africa. And her job there, her official rating was as flagship of the U.S. African Squadron, and she was there to capture vessels that were engaged in the illegal slave trade, largely American vessels that were engaged, or American flag vessels. We were there in partnership with the British, and Constellation captured 3 ships, 2 of which were empty but were fitted out as slavers. And then the 3rd was a ship called, or a bark, a specific type of rig called the Cora, which had a human cargo of about just over 700 and women and children on board, who were subsequently repatriated to Liberia, which at that time, as you know, was a U.S. protectorate, and the policy then was they were basically populating the region there. But these people, it's very interesting. We had a delegation on board from Liberia a number of years ago, and they were from the state of Maryland in Liberia.
Oh, yeah.
And it was one of the most interesting things that one of the folks said was that, and I'll preface this by saying, when these people were brought to Liberia, it was not really repatriation because they came from the Congo area. Right. So, but he said, yeah, I know about the descendants of these people. We still refer to them as Congos. So yeah, it was very, very interesting. Anyway, after she was on duty there until 1861, when they finally got orders to go back home, and they all knew that on board, even though they were stationed off the coast of Africa, they all knew that stuff was going on over here, and the division lines were already forming in the crew. Some people were, they were still working together as a crew, but some people, the minute we get home, we're going south or we're going north. And very interesting. We just published a diary, or a journal written by one of the ship's crew members. He was a landsman. He was basically just about the lowest of the low on board, besides a ship's boy. But he had been educated, and he was keeping a journal so that all of his friends and family would know what his experience was like in his 3 years in the Navy. And it's fascinating. And he tells us all about the capture of the Cora, and he tells us what life was like on board. And he really, by the time they were done with that 3-year stint, they were so ready to go home. The officers almost couldn't keep control of them anymore. They had their last liberty call. They went ashore. Not the greatest reflection of our naval personnel, but they got drunk. They came back on the ship. He describes like half the crew being drunk and the rest of the half of the crew being half drunk, and it took them, they were just so. And then,
well, what would happen today if we told the midshipmen and
the Naval Academy?
You'd have to be on board for 3 years running.
Yeah. I know. It would be, and not much liberty call. Not much liberty. I mean, it wasn't all work and no play. They did do some. Yeah. So, you want to take a look around?
Yep.
Take a look around.
The young ladies downstairs are telling me they formed a drama club and stuff.
Yes.
And everything, so.
Yes, they did. Yes, and they used to put on, they had an interesting repertoire of plays. They called them farces, I think, or something like that. And, they'd play all the parts. The men would dress up in women's clothing to play the women's parts and all that. So it's pretty interesting. And they would do it on the productions when they go, not just among the crew, but with the dignitaries that would come aboard. Just watch your step coming down here.
Are really original, or
Well,
have they been
that's
cast?
when these are all reproductions. We know of one of the ship's original pieces of armament that's still in existence, and it's in the Trophy Park in Norfolk, Virginia. There's also, and it's a small piece of bronze boat howitzer, and then there's another one in at the Naval Academy Museum in the Visitors Center, actually, at the Naval Academy, which, and they say, it's funny that we say, well, that was one of Constellation's guns, and they said, well, it might be one of Constellation, it might be a gun that was on Constellation at one time. So there's a little bit of fine point, but they want to retain, the possession of it. So, but the ship has, she's been here in Baltimore since 1955. When she came here, she was already not in very good shape. And over the years, she slowly deteriorated to a point where it was, something's got to be done or the ship is going to disappear. So that was about in 1992. She was actually, quote, condemned by the Navy, closed to visitors, and about 4 years later, in 1996, we started a $9 million restoration project. And that took, it was 1996 to 1999. Came back to Baltimore with all flags flying and everything in 1999. And she was basically a hollow shell at that point. There really wasn't anything inside. And so it's since that time that we've added everything else, like all the armament, we've redone the captain's cabin. There's just been a lot of stuff that we have done here that has, sort of, and we continue to do things as time and funds allow.
And is that largely privately funded?
Either privately funded, well, I should say a combination of private funding and competitive grants.
Okay.
So we've got, we worked with Maryland Heritage Areas Authority and the Baltimore Heritage Area Authority. There was a federal program at one point called Save America's Treasures, which unfortunately is not active anymore, but hopefully will at some point, because that was a wonderful funding source, and that program did some great things. As far as museums and exhibit sort of stuff is concerned, the Institute of Museum and Library Services has been, I've gotten 2 grants from the IMLS, one which we're using to fabricate new exhibits in a new building that we're going to be constructing next to the ship, which is actually going to be much more complementary to the pier and everything around here and have a larger exhibit space. So we'll take a look back in the captain's cabin.
That's actually where we're going to shoot, is in the interview.
You're all set up here.
Yeah,
And then we can,
but it's warmer on deck, actually.
yeah.
But I thought you'd like to shoot in here, because it's a
I felt like
nice...
it was warmer.
No
in
sun,
here.
no sun hitting down here.
No, there's not, but no wind either.
That's true.
Anyway, this is where the captain would have entertained and, or disciplined, depending upon what was going on. A lot of most of the paneling around here is original. And to get back to the restoration, what's above us and what we're standing on is new.
Okay.
Pretty much, there's a few, like there's a deck beam back all the way to the stern that's original, and there are a couple on the deck below that are original, but wooden ships, the bane of the existence of wooden ships is fresh water. So
Right.
anything coming down from the top. Salt water is great. I love saltwater wooden ships. Saltwater and steel ships isn't so good. Saltwater and wooden ships is great because basically the organisms that rot wood don't live in the salt. And so salt kind of pickles things, as it were, preserves. So when they brought her into restoration in 1996, they basically ripped this deck off, just basically she was down to just the spar deck, or just the berth deck, which is where everybody lived. And we'll go down there in a quick second. So they managed, they did save some parts from up here, and I should say as well that the ship is still about 50% original. So most of her framing is original. She's still got some original bottom planking, basically 12 strakes or 12 lengths all the way fore and aft is still original, beautiful, white oak, 5 inches thick, 8 inches wide, 50 feet long, totally clear, beautiful, beautiful. I mean, it's old, but it's hard as a rock, and it's really wonderful stuff.
And when we go down below to the next deck, then you'll see where everybody lived, and then we'll actually be on the original. So.
By this walking through history that they're able to do, and they're able to see the hammocks and see the officer's wardroom and sit in the captain's cabin and have this whole immersive experience that you're never going to get at most types of museums.
Our crew knows the USS Constellation is an amazing experience, but don't just take our word for it. In 1955, Constellation returned home to the Chesapeake Bay, this time for permanent display in Baltimore. Constellation was kept afloat until 1994, when she was closed to the public. A critical restoration completed in 1999 ensured that the USS Constellation would remain open to visitors, and improvements to the ship continue today.
The Constellation is constantly changing. If you came on board a year ago, you'll see something new today. If you come on a year from now, you'll see something new then. We're constantly working to improve the ship.
Constellation's restoration has helped keep Chesapeake Bay maritime trades and traditions alive. Today, Constellation is the largest example of Chesapeake Bay shipbuilding in existence. That's enough history for now.
Let's say 40, no, I'm sorry, probably more like 200 families, who we keep in touch with, and every year we have a crew and descendant reunion. So crew members, because across the collection, there's still people alive who sailed on Taney, and there's still people alive who sailed on submarine, and there was one, I think he's still around, a fellow who served on board here during World War II. A fellow named Murray Weingarten, who lived in Ellicott City, and
The last of them.
not many around, and so that's really fun, and when those folks come around and they're just so excited, a lot of them have never been here before,
It's so interesting because I met a family of it's a different story, but the guy who was a Surgeon General under Lincoln. And his descendants had apparently had this like foot locker. They didn't even know they had it. And they found just unbelievable
treasure trove.
And it was like a great granddaughter or something, and just happened to be cleaning things out and found this. Literally things just piled on top of each other in a locker, and they turned it over to a couple of different museums to really begin the curation. But you've got to imagine that there are things like that just kind of all over the place, and when you stumble across it. You do.
There was something on Antiques Roadshow that was related to this a while back. Yeah, it was. I can't remember.
So thing a descendant coming with something they had found.
Yeah.
Wow.
And actually, I think it was more related to the frigate Constellation, the ship built here in Baltimore. It was like a captain's. I don't know. It was some sort of a. I don't want to say a liquor cabinet, but something like that box. So that the captain would have had his midnight cordial in or something like that. It's kind of fun.
That's worth going.
Thanks very much for coming, and I hope you enjoyed the tour.
Thank you, I did. I learned a lot just in this short
That you getting an opportunity to come on board, and anytime.
Oh, I'm coming back.
Good.
Thank you.
So welcome aboard USS Constellation and enjoy your visit to the historic sites of the Chesapeake Bay Gateways Network.
So we do a lot of things, trying to do workforce development as well, and obviously this is the equity piece, but always trying to have it linked to careers and employment outcomes. So there's
I do a STEM forum every year. Actually,
do
it's
you?
coming up probably on it's coming up on March 9th. I knew that there was a conflict. We do
ours is
one.
in the afternoon.
Yeah, we do one every year on the Hill where we bring. This is one that we host, kind of bringing all of these sectors together to say, well, not only do we have to have a conversation with our girls and our boys about entering in the STEM fields, but they got to see a pathway too. You know, it can't be just done in the abstract. So when we also just did our recent college fair that I do every year. We had about 165 institutions there, and we also invited NASA, Northrop Grumman, all of these companies in, and the Association of Black Engineers and things to come in and actually have demonstration projects with students, so they can see it isn't just about identifying something that you do in college, but here's a career field. And I won't forget, there was one young African-American woman who wasn't thinking about STEM at all. She did well in math and science and stuff. Her parents were trying to push her, oh, go to this school because they, do engineering or whatever. So I'm not interested. So I said, I just happened to walk around her and I said, have you been over to that NASA table? And so I took her over there and she starts talking with some of the engineers there. And the next thing you know, she's talking about how she can get an internship. And it all just kind of clicked for her. It's very experiential.
And that's what's so important. And that's the same thing with the work that we do here. By having kids see that doors are open for them. And interestingly, our focus is obviously for girls. Right. But we have a lot of boys come to things too, because they also want doors open that aren't necessarily traditional for them. Right. That's right. And it's interesting how in my day, the boys couldn't take home ec, but they can be some of the great chefs of the world.
That's right. That's right.
So there's a great dichotomy in reality, and if they can keep seeing past. This shirt there was from Mary Cleve from Space. And she was a girl who, when she was in high school, wanted to become a pilot. By the time she was 16, she got a pilot's license.
When I came out of high school, I was accepted into the Air Force Academy, and I decided not to go because they weren't letting women into the pilot.
The things that you'd want to go to the Air Force.
Right, and that's what I wanted to do.
Of course, and that's
and
exactly.
I was like, forget it. Why would I do? Everybody else gets to go because they want to fly jets, but I get to go because I want to do what? And actually, this lady right here, General Woodward, came into the Air Force Academy just about 8 years or so after I was accepted, and she got to go to flight school.
And
then so I got to talk to her. She used to be at Andrews, and so I met her there, and then she was commanded that, all of the the NATO forces for the Libya operation, she commanded them. And so I got to meet her again in Germany when she was in
And that's why these stories are so important who knows her name?
Yeah.
And what we see our mission is making what's invisible visible. Yeah. So that you constantly, not just, you have this one wonderful event a year, which we applaud you for, but we're doing this every day, all the time, in different career fields and different areas. And Mary Cleve is such a great example because she couldn't be a pilot, just like you couldn't fly at the Air Force, from the Air Force Academy. Then she thought, I want to fly, so maybe I'll be a flight attendant, at least go up and fly. They said she was too short. So she couldn't be a flight attendant either. So she ended up getting her engineering degree, applying to NASA, and becoming an astronaut.
How about that?
She flew higher than all the people who turned her down. And so I think it's such a great story when we're meeting with children and students especially to say you have these barriers, you're the wrong size, the wrong color, the wrong neighborhood, the wrong anything, but look at where you can fly.
No, it's really great. I had a really terrific experience because I've always wanted to be in jets. And a couple of years ago, now that I'm a member of Congress, and our Air National Guard that covers all of the metropolitan region, and they invited me to go up in an F-16. And when they gave me the controls,
did you love it?
I was like, I was born to do this, I'm pulling 6, 7 Gs without even thinking of it, because they trained you, beforehand.
And you
but I
loved
wasn't going to be one of those members of Congress that went up and threw up and passed out and stuff.
I
was like, I can do this. That's right. I can do this thing.
Yeah,
and so it was actually really great. But I
it.
thought about Maggie there and all of these women. This is really this is
and that's
terrific.
And
women have always had, look at this, women have always had an aviation history. It's not
and
new.
We have a great film that sometime you might want to see or use in something you're doing, done by a Maryland woman from Howard County, about the first National Women's Aviation Derby. And it's an incredible video, and it's amazing history. that she tells, but it was created by a Maryland woman, this video.
Wow. Well, I'll have to come back, and
He will come
sorry, I
back.
think
The beginning of the
engineers-
center was always to be inclusive, so we're not making the same mistakes that the traditional history we learned, which was his story,
Right.
not our story, not her story, and that it's really inclusive by race and by ethnicity and by, regions and all of these things, so that when we first opened the center, the first people who came in here, the day we opened, were 5 women from the Piscataway Nation.
Oh, nice.
And their chief, Mervyn Savoy.
Right, of course,
Mervyn
yeah.
came in and said, finally, they're telling our story.
Oh, that's great.
And that was just,
Oh,
it
that's
meant
great.
so much
That's
to
great.
us.
Yeah, because you thought about that
Yes.
intentionally.
Intentionally, because it
Because
means
that's what we
something.
knew, when there is history, that if it's not intentional, then it won't be included. And so it has to be intentional.
And otherwise, it's invisible,
Right.
and yet all these contributions were there all the time. We don't have to manufacture
That's
anything.
right.
It happened, and yet it wasn't captured in the curriculum, in the books, in anything. I just want to share this one other thing with you. This is exciting, because we're being a role model. You know the effort, and I know you're
Right.
supporting the effort to have a National Women's History
Yes.
Museum in Washington.
Yep.
But we've created this model for every state, and what we hope each state would do to honor the women and girls of their state. And we had a group that came, and we have several states that are exploring this. But we also had a group that was in here from educators from India, and came here, and we heard back from them after being in the sacred space of the Maryland Women's Heritage Center. We realized we need to do this for our girls too, and they've already opened a sister center in India. And this is their symbol they sent to us with the butterfly.
Emerge, emancipate, and elevate.
Isn't that wonderful? So we're so proud of this, effort
Oh, that's great.
that is already making an
Have
international.
ripple effects,
Yes.
right.
So, and we thank you. We know all that you do. We appreciate, because it's genuine, and it really, I was so happy when you got into Congress and began to be able to make a difference at the national level.
Thanks. Well, it feels good. And I mean, I think now, I've been in Congress just a couple of years, and I'm the chair of our Democratic Women's Working Group, but also co-chair of our Women's Caucus. And as Democratic women, we sat down about a year ago to really focus on, well, what would make a difference in women's lives, and, created this women's economic agenda that's about, getting 1 day of paid leave, increasing wages, making sure that we have child care, and equal pay for equal work. But I mean, it's much, what the theme of this museum is that there has to be real equality in order for that real equality to come to fruition. Well, this has been fun.
Isn't it?
Yeah, I wish I could
exciting?
spend
I know you
a
could.
more time, but this is
great.
a good primer.
You guys want to do
Yeah,
a quick
I
picture
got
right
a
here?
quick.
Good.
1, 2, 3.